Welcome back to the Teaming Up podcast. In case you were left wanting more, we're coming to you with a bonus episode from Teaming Up Live that features the Q&A portion of the event. Listen in as Jason Fuller and Adissa Hargett Robinson answer our audience's burning questions. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and keep your eyes and ears open for a not-so-distant announcement for our next Teaming Up Live event. Now, take it away, y'all.
Who has a question? Mike, up front.
All right. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us. What advice do you have for us pitching your news program? Who do we pitch?
So I'll say for me, I'd say, if you're pitching a show, it is, and I'm always impressed with how public relations people are able to know, like, booking producers, and I guess you guys, I don't know if you just like look at LinkedIn or whatever, but I'd say, once you're reaching someone, I would say to look at the show that they work for or the platform that they're working with and send pitches that kind of are most aligned on that. And I would also say to be timely with it. I think, sometimes I would get pitches on Tuesday for someone to be on for Wednesday. And I'm not saying that those type of things don't ever happen, because sometimes, things come up. But I would say primarily from my experience, a lot of the shows have kind of a framework of what we're going to do, with the exception of breaking news and like things that kind of come out of nowhere. There's kind of a framework that's already been in place. And so if you're sending something on Tuesday and you're like, hey, this person's available Wednesday or even Tuesday night, every now and again in a pinch, you're going to need someone. But primarily, if you have someone on Tuesday, it's good to maybe send it the week ahead of time. So then you can say it in the morning meeting on Monday about what's going on. And I would also say to kind of pitch thoughtfully based on the show, like I said, the platform that you're working on. Because if you're working on a show like GMA3, you're probably, and that's a very female-dominated show, a lot of kids, a lot of family type stuff, and you're pitching something that's very heavy, that might work for this week, or it might work for ABC News Live or World News, but it's probably not the right fit for that show. So my thing would just be the timeliness of it and making sure that the time makes sense, but also that the pitch would align with that show.
Jason, anything you'd add on how to pitch?
Yes. Brevity, but very punchy. I think just as readers will get lost, and we have people at NPR who analyze when listeners tune out and when readers actually stop reading. Like, is it in the second graph? Is it in the third or the fourth graph? And I think when sending out an email, I don't want to say it needs to be under 250 words, but tight, punchy, bolding the things that are actually the most appetizing. And I think coupling that with knowing whom you're actually pitching toward is a really good recipe. I'm one of those persons at NPR whose email address is very easy. So I get hit with a lot. There are 2 or 3 persons on our show will all be on the same CC, and we'll just sometimes stand up, look at each other from the cubicle, and be like, "Yes, our name, it's the name." But I think knowing what someone's actual beat is, and also actually being a consumer of said outlet. So I think if you just know, for instance, that that All Things Considered tends to have more of its feature conversations with artists, with an author, to close out a show. I think that sometimes helps persons who maybe you're pitching to have someone on and they really want to have a longer, more exhaustive conversation. But if you know off rip that, hey, the max that All Things Considered can actually allocate towards this is 8 minutes and 9 seconds, and that's including our hosts reading you in, reading you out, like that actually, I think just knowing like what the parameters are that a show is actually working with, that's invaluable.
Okay. Other questions?
Who do we send pitches to? Is it reporters? Is it producers?
So reporters, producers, editors. But again, I say that knowing that at least how All Things Considered and Morning Edition works, like so many persons are, regardless of what their title is, people are always reaching out, people are always emailing. And so, yes, producers and reporters more specifically, and then I would say editors, but yes.
Thank you.
Cam?
How has misinformation, disinformation kind of impacted how you report? And then I guess, how can PR professionals who are pitching you help in that effort?
Question for our audio was misinformation and disinformation and how PR practitioners can help with some of that and what you're seeing in the industry with it.
One thing I'll say, and this is like, of course, is like specifically for NPR, but we have a disinformation and misinformation team. So we actually have designated reporters, producers, and a lead editor. And so I believe that disinformation and misinformation team, granted we are public, I believe it's about like maybe 5 to 6 reporters, editors strong, but they are climbing this hill that is misinformation and disinformation. So we actually have an entire team. So there are certain instances where there may simply put, let's say I didn't necessarily like have like the strongest like organic pitch in the morning. If I just knew, for instance, that there was maybe just a trend in terms of maybe particular statistics being used consistently to try to tell or paint a story in a particular way. Sometimes being a producer is broaching like, hey, I've read like 3 or 4 stories that are identifying this particular number, and it'll be amazing if we could get Brett Neely and the misinformation team to actually walk us through in a 2-way conversation about what people are seeing, how consumers, how the audience has been running into this like in their day-to-day lives. So I think that's something where we're blessed to have a designated, just team that is tackling that outright. Like it speaks to NPR's commitment to that.
Adisa, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think that misinformation is definitely a big part of just society and of the news cycle. And I'd say it's definitely something that is talked about internally about, do we have banners? Do we live fact check and say, hey, this isn't correct? Do we, and there's a lot of thought that goes into that and how do we kind of address it? And so I think that it's a moving conversation because, you still have to be thoughtful because you don't want it to appear as if you are being biased in any way, So I think that it's definitely a fine line that the newsrooms are walking. I know I was definitely in several conversations with people at ABC, around various events and how they were going to be covered and how we were going to have them in real time and figuring out, how do we want to address this, and figuring out the live component of it. So I would say that's definitely something that we are navigating. And I would say, for PR professionals, I would say I guess in a time where misinformation is everywhere, it's important to have people who can break these things down. And so, if you're working with experts who have years of experience and are able to really be the nonpartisan voice and be the serious explainer, those type of things I think years ago maybe weren't going to be as appealing or as interesting, but I think that now, there is some legs for that to be able to break that down for sure.
Other questions? Yes.
So I was reading earlier this week that digital ad spend and influencer marketing, that sort of bucket, is on pace to outpace traditional ad placement this year. And I'm curious, obviously two very different organizations. Is there an impact on how you do your job and how your organizations are sort of responding to a new underwriting, a sense of the market is sort of supporting media in different ways now, and how you guys are adjusting both your reporting and how your organization is responding to that?
I think when we're talking about underwriting, I think firstly, like, NPR tries to maintain, and they do maintain, like that firewall between editorial and finances. But sometimes when you're Amazon and you're like the big and it's known that that they are a sponsor, one thing that we always try to do, and a lot of our reporting is at the top or at the bottom, speaking to how this organization is a sponsor of NPR's. However, they didn't have any say-so, any latitude in terms of like how this conversation or content was actually put together, or questions or things of that nature. So like that's one way that we get out in front of that. But I think also the really interesting thing is, like, because we're public, like we're in this weird predicament where there's always like a kind of like looking forward in terms of like trying to secure funding. So, and this is even with amazing, products. Like, for instance, like I know like NPR Tiny Desk concerts are like enormous. And so like, I know for instance, like there have been a lot of different, I'm only imagining there have been a number of suitors who've like approached them in terms of trying to have some sort of a relationship, but it's because of trying to maintain that line of demarcation is something that NPR is like really big on. And again, when you do have, when we know how we get funded, like it also does make things like uncomfortable because there clearly can be or on an optics level like a conflict of interest. So it's something that I'm thankful that we don't actually dive into a whole lot, having that sort of like cross interference, but it's always a battle. It's always a battle. I'm not sure if I answered that as cogently, but.
So I'll say, I think, there's definitely, seen the effects of advertising and television has shifted. I'd say at, like probably 10 years ago, when ABC News Live first started, people just were kind of like, oh, that's just like the new streaming thing. But now people really see it as the future because of advertising shifting, where like the biggest shows, GMA and like World News and some of the other shows, they're still carrying an audience, of course, but the advertising is definitely shifting. And I think that it's been seen in the mass layoffs and in a lot of different things that have gone on over the last few years. So I would say, you definitely feel it. And I would say that I would say that a lot of people are trying to put a lot more focus into streaming because, that does seem to be a different market with advertising and with just how everything is structured in general. But I'll also say, in terms of advertisers and large companies, I'd say that was definitely an issue that I kind of ran into quite a lot of times. First of all, Disney is the parent company of ABC. So anytime something was remotely involving Disney in any way, we had to have a disclaimer that like Disney's the parent company. So like you definitely have to, of course, have that line. And, with that being said, Disney's a family company. So there's a lot of rules that like would not necessarily, like maybe for NBC or CBS, with not the same parent company, they might have a little bit more flexibility in some stories than, ABC would have just because of that within itself. But what I will say is with some larger companies, like I would receive a pitch for this woman who was working with HelloFresh, and she at one point was struggling with food insecurity, and now she's opened up 3 of her own food pantries. And I was like, oh, this is a great story. It's really inspirational. This is going to be a great story for GMA3. We did this story, and in the pitch, she also mentioned like HelloFresh was someone who had kind of helped her create this program. I said from the beginning, hey, HelloFresh is a large company. Unless there is some sort of sponsorship part of the story, we cannot have that be the focus. And I don't even want to guarantee that we're going to be able to mention their name, because when you bring up large brands like that, you are kind of walking a very fine line, because it can seem as if it is an endorsement. And if that company has not given money to the network, you have to really be very careful with it, and almost it's very much frowned upon. And so we ended up doing the story, and I had said from the beginning, we can't really be, advertising HelloFresh. We're advertising this woman and her story. HelloFresh was not mentioned in the story at all. And the woman who I worked with on the story was a bit upset, because she was like, hey, our client is HelloFresh. We really were hoping to at least have them mentioned. Like, can we have it? Like, can you tweak kind of like the headline? Can we update it? And, no, like, we're not able to do that, because that becomes a gray area, and then it becomes kind of like a commercial. And they definitely do stories like that where they are working with a brand and they'll say like, this was sponsored by. But if that sponsorship agreement has not been kind of met, I would say if it is a large company, it's walking a gray area, and it's very difficult to do that.
We're right about at time. We'll ask one more question right back here.
How has AI impacted you all, negatively or positively in your organization? Are there tools that you have been kind of pushed to use, or are there things that you're using that have been either good or bad?
No, So I think the interesting thing is, firstly, like NPR, we are unionized, right? And so with that, with SAG-AFTRA, like there were certain protections that journalists were fighting for in terms of making sure that AI wouldn't, for instance, be able to, generate Ari Shapiro's voice, for instance, right? Or especially as I feel like it was maybe for like a good year, there were just so many stories on deep fakes, and how, again, at the time it's like, oh, this sounds like President Biden's voice, but I'm pretty sure he's never talked about, I don't know, this particular topic ever in his life, but we're seeing that, we're seeing him enunciate those words. So that wasn't an answer to the question, but just I guess taking a step back, like we fight really hard to make sure that AI isn't eliminating any positions. I think that's like the immediate concern and fear, because of just, again, how persons especially wouldn't even be getting any sort of like, fruit from their voice being adapted. So that's first thing. In terms of like actual tools that are being like implemented like across NPR, no, but we do go through so many different trainings where we are trying to identify whether or not if AI is being implemented. So I'm not answering your question, but I just know that, especially from like the NPR, and I'm not a steward shop rep for NPR, but there was just such a big fight in terms of trying to make sure that AI would not have that sort of an influence. And we do from time to time, get notes that may come from well above our pay grade that's like, hey, this little tool may be being implemented to just see if that like helps with efficiency. Sometimes people look at each other like, is there a way of trying to implement AI? But it's something where we're trying to, again, protect the jobs of public media journalists. That was kind of like the biggest. I mean, I haven't seen that many persons like stand up to defend one another and just their image, their likeness, their voice, and in so many ways. So I'll keep an eye out so that I can have a better response in terms of tools. But I'll just say for me, there hasn't been anything that's really, served as a hurdle in my work more recently when it comes to AI. But I'm just really big on trying to, again, continue to like be that protective wall, if you will, just because AI is becoming so ubiquitous. Where again, whether it's overseas, you're seeing that news is coming from AI bots entirely, or anchors that may be AI. So I think in so many ways we just as an organization have been trying to defend on that front.
I'll just add that, I'd say that AI has added an extra level for us to fact check and just kind of make sure that things are correct. I think that you get a lot of like story leads or like ideas of what's going on from social media, and there's a lot of deep fakes and everything on social media. And so I think that, even for myself, if I see something on TikTok and I see people talking about it, I can't just run with it and assume it's true, making sure that you are doing your due diligence because they look very compelling and you can, you want to believe what you're seeing. So I think that it does kind of put a little bit more on us to make sure that what we are seeing is definitely true. And then on a personal level, I will say I do like ChatGPT. I think that it's great. Like if you kind of have an email that you want to write and you're like, this is how I wrote it, but I would like a little bit help making it sound this way, and you plug it in and they change the tone and now you sound the way that you want it to sound. I think that there can definitely be some benefits to it. But I think just as Jason was saying, definitely want to make sure that it's not cutting anyone else's jobs or taking those things away. I definitely could see that happening. I hope it doesn't happen, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if in the next 10 years that like some jobs did kind of go away, because I feel like there have been a lot of cuts across the board. And so I think that networks are trying to figure out, how can we save money? What can we do? Because we already have, I think from my understanding, there used to be like 2 assignment editors per shift. Now there's 1 assignment editor per shift. And so, like things like that happen. And there's always a look at, okay, well, how can we squeeze this dollar even further? And so, ideally that those jobs or any jobs don't leave because of AI. But, in the next 10 years, if they were to, I wouldn't be surprised if that was to happen. But, I will say on a personal level, not even for like work purposes, I can see the benefits in ChatGPT, and it is very easy to use, and it does really give you great material that you would like. And so I can definitely see how it could be used going forward. I hope that it doesn't, take jobs away, but I do enjoy ChatGPT.
If I could tag on really quickly, and I'm forgetting the tool, but it's a Google AI tool in particular that our senior producer, I felt it just gave a training, which yes. So in terms of like trying to identify, for instance, what may be like. There's almost like you would be able to like engage with what are the top, not only just like the top reported out stories, but the stories that folks are having lots of engagement surrounding. Like I think in so many ways like that's helped our team in terms of like from a digital standpoint, like knowing that, for instance, I don't know, what's a good example? I think I don't know, I'm a sports fan, so like Tyrese Halliburton and his choke, symbol after they were playing the New York Knicks, right? That was like one of the most talked about, little button issues that was spilling across like beyond sports, just because, everyone has experienced an instance where they maybe have choked and, just it really just helps gauge like where audience members are. And so I think that's also half of the battle is like knowing where your audience is actually what they're intrigued by. And so from there, it's trying to find nuanced approaches, ways in which that we can put an NPR like, flavor and twist on this where, again, where you're standing out from something where we know everyone's talking about, but like creating that I heard it on NPR moment is like being able to like gauge like what is everybody talking about, but then like really honing in and finding the right characters who bring out texture and tension. Yeah.
Well, Adisa and Jason are going to stick around for a little bit. If anybody has any questions and you want to talk to them in person, please feel free. We want to thank you again, Adisa Hargett-Robinson, Jason Fuller. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for listening to the Teaming Up podcast. Teaming Up is brought to you by the Hodges Partnership, a public relations agency that does PR differently. We bring clients thoughtful, strategic communications through earned, owned, and paid media. The Teaming Up podcast is a Happy Committee production. Episodes are released monthly, so subscribe on your favorite podcast service so you never miss an episode.